Good morning, my dear students. Today we again start our session with History, Chapter 1, the French Revolution. Students, in our previous lecture, I was explaining you about the directory rule and the role of women in revolution. Now, students, today I will cover our last three topics and finish our chapter. Today I will explaining you the abolition of slavery, the revolution in everyday life, and conclusion of the chapter. Now, students, abolition of slavery. One of the most revolutionary social reforms of the Jacobin regime was the abolition of slavery in the French colonies. The colonies in the Caribbean, Martinique, Guadeloupe, and Saint Domingos were important suppliers of commodities such as tobacco, indigo, sugar, and coffee. But the reluctance of Europeans to go and work in distant and unfamiliar lands meant a shortage of labor on the plantations. So, this was met by a triangular slave trade between Europe, Africa, and the Americans. The slave trade began in the 17th century. French merchants sailed from the ports of Bordeaux or Nantes to the African coast, where they bought slaves from local Chipetians. Branded and shackled, the slaves were packed tightly into ships for the 3-month-long voyage across the Atlantic to the Caribbean. There, they were sold to plantation owners. The exploitation of slave labor made it possible to meet the growing demand in European markets for sugar, coffee, and indigo. Port cities like Bordeaux and Nantes owed their economic prosperity to the flourishing slave trade. Now, students, throughout the 18th century, there was little criticism of slavery in France. It was finally the convention, which is in 1794, legislated to free all slaves in the French overseas possessions. This, however, turned out to be a short-term measure. 10 years later, Napoleon reintroduced slavery. Slavery was finally abolished in French colonies in 1848. Now, the revolution and everyday life. The years following 1789 in France saw many changes in the lives of man, women, and children. The revolutionary governments took it upon themselves to pass law that would translate the ideals of liberty and equality into everyday practice. One important law that came into effect soon after the storming of Bastille in the summer of 1789 was the abolition of censorship in the old regime. You all know about the old regime? Old regime, that means the period before 1789. All the written material and cultural activities, books, newspapers, plays could be published and performed only after they had been approved by the censors of the king. Now, the Declaration of Rights of Man and Citizen proclaimed freedom of speech and expression to be a natural right. Newspapers, pamphlets, books, and printed pictures flooded the town of France, from where they traveled rapidly into the countryside. They all described and discussed the events and changes taking place in France. Each side sought to convince the others and its position through the medium of print. Plays, songs, and festive processions attract large number of people. Now, the conclusion of the chapter. In 1804, Napoleon Bonaparte crowned himself Emperor of France. He set out to conquer neighboring countries, European countries, dispossessing dynasties and creating kingdoms where he placed members of his family. Napoleon saw his role as a modernizer of Europe. He introduced many laws such as the protection of private property and a uniform system of weights and measures provided by the decimal system. Initially, many saw Napoleon as liberator who would bring freedom for the people. But soon the Napoleon armies came to be viewed everywhere as an invading force. He was finally defeated at Waterloo in 1815. Many of his measures that carried the revolutionary ideas of liberty and modern laws to the other parts of Europe that had an impact on people long after Napoleon had left. Now, the ideas of liberty and democratic rights were the most important legacy of the French Revolution. These spread from France to the rest of Europe during the 19th century, where feudal systems were abolished. Colonized peoples reworked the ideas of freedom from bondage into the movements to create a sovereign nation state. Tipu Sultan and Raja Ram Mohan Rai are the two examples of individuals who responded to the ideas coming from revolutionary France. Now, students, from tomorrow we will start doing a new chapter in DP, that is Democratic Politics, Chapter 2. What is democracy? Why democracy? Thank you, student.